And by the way, if North Carolina beats Miami this weekend, the excitement and interest in going to the Virginia game is going to shoot through the roof. So this is the equivalent of like buying stock before the jump because they're going to become a CFP contender. Oh, should we have that conversation? Let's have that conversation.
Oh, okay.
Within the context of this college football season, which is important, okay? Within the context of the 2023 college football season, North Carolina is absolutely a legitimate college football playoff contender. How about that? First thing that matters, schedule. UNC is undefeated through 5 games. I don't care if it was ugly, pretty, if it was smooth, if it was rocky. Can't be better than 5-0 through 5 games. Not exactly a murderer's row, I'll give you that. South Carolina, meh. App State, took them to the limit. Minnesota, not the most dynamic non-conference Power 5 game. Pitt, yikes. And Syracuse, they blew them out. That's not the scariest lineup in the world, but there's not exactly a murderer's row coming up either. You have number 25 Miami this weekend, coming off one of the weirdest losses I think I'll ever see, where Mario Cristobal decided not to win that game. He almost made the choice to not win that game.
Gosh.
There's UVA, who has their struggles this year. Georgia Tech, who was on the opposite side of that Miami game, but they're scrappy. I'll give them credit. Campbell, this area is aware of Campbell, but as a Power 5 opponent, you would expect to beat Campbell.
FCS school.
Yeah. 17 Duke. That game, throw the records out anyway. Clemson, not as scary as they normally are at all. They just beat Wake by less than a score. And NC State to end it. Again, I guess you throw the records out, but you'd like your chances there based on how they've played thus far. The schedule sets them up. I mean, I think you can almost conservatively say one loss heading into the conference championship game if they're selected for the conference championship game, if there's not other undefeated teams. Second thing that matters is the talent. Specifically on offense, UNC has the talent. The defense is the worrisome part, right? Pass rush and run stopping. They haven't been stopping the run as well as they should, and their pass rush goes dormant at times, but they actually do a pretty good job, as Dennis has pointed out a few times, at getting off the field on third down. So maybe the pass rush is more effective than it is stat padding, but the run stopping is where you have your issue. But the offense appears to be talented enough to overcome it, talented enough to make up the difference. And then there's the puncher's chance that you have with Drake Maye. Right? Drake Maye is the stud ace number 1 pitcher in a 7-game series. If he can go out there and get you 3 wins, if he can win game 1, 4, and 7, you only have to come up with so much else around him. You know what I mean? He gives you that puncher's chance. He can't do it by himself, but he closes the gap pretty aggressively. Here's Anita Marks of ESPN on what scouts are saying about Drake Maye.
Last year's pro day, Drake Maye performed for the scouts. And I had scouts tell me that they were more impressed with Drake Maye. Not one ball was dropped. Not one ball was dropped in his workout with the scouts. They were there scouting, obviously, other UNC players who were eligible to come out of the draft. Scouts that I talked to are over the moon. They say that his ceiling is Joe Montana-like. So, and this isn't just, Anita Marks on ESPN radio. These are some of the best scouts who've been scouting players for years, decades in the NFL. I'm telling you, this young man is special. And I think he's just, because Caleb Williams is so, at USC and they're winning games. And so I truly believe that he's the best quarterback that will be available in this year's draft. But I won't be shocked if Caleb Williams goes first.
Whoa. First of all, I think we're officially to the point where people forget who Joe Montana was. This is the second time in today, I think. Second time today. The other one may have come yesterday. Second time in 24 hours, we'll say. I've heard a quarterback compared to Joe Montana. which seems like it should be much more difficult. What was it? Mike Tannenbaum or Rex Ryan, maybe. It was someone on ESPN, compared Brock Purdy to Joe Montana. And now we have Anita Marks comparing Drake Maye to Joe Montana.
Well, that's what she's heard from scouts. So these are scouts making the comparison.
Anita Marks citing a scout comparing him to Joe Montana.
Yeah.
And you know what's the crazy part? Drake Maye and Joe Montana stylistically have very little in common. Joe Montana was not the biggest, the strongest arm, the mobile. Like he was getting by, I guess, a little bit more like Brock Purdy, but let's not pretend like Brock Purdy's quality has been Joe Montana's got 4 of them things. He's got 4 rings. And equally as many Skechers ads. Like let's not disrespect Joe Montana here. Do you know what I actually thought when I heard Anita Marks say how impressive he was at Pro Day? Mm-hmm. My first thought was, do you think that's why Josh Downs fell? Do you think they were at Pro Day going, oh, well, of course you're going to have a lot of receiving yards with this going on?
Yeah.
Nobody's dropped a pass, including, the scrubs that are running around with him. And Josh Downs, real difficult. Getting balls on the money everywhere. That's why I dropped to the 79th pick when I thought he might be an early second. There's the puncher's chance for North Carolina, going back to the college football playoff argument. If you are a one-loss team or an undefeated team heading into the ACC championship against Florida State, you might look at Florida State's roster and from 1 to 85 of all the scholarship guys, 1 to 105 of the scholarship and walk-ons, you might say Florida State has more talent. But if you have the best player on the field at that position, you will always have a chance. And I like Jordan Travis. I don't like him as much as Drake Maye. Even if he's more productive and he might be a better Heisman candidate or whatever, if we were doing recess, right? You toss the bat back and forth and then you do the hand over hand thing and see who gets to pick first. If I get to pick first, Drake Maye.
Yeah.
If you put all the ACC players out on a recess field, all right, everybody, who's got first pick? I got Drake Maye. They're like, wait, but Jordan Travis is the Heisman. Yep. Yes, he is. Fantastic. Next one might be a wide receiver from Florida State, though. That guy seems like he'd be good in a recess setting. Coleman? So it seems like he'd be good in
Coleman.
He'd be good in a recess opportunity. Put a flag on him? Yeah, he's hurdling people. But I legitimately think North Carolina, and the other thing is there's not 4 juggernauts out there.
No, there's not.
Like, that's what I mean by the context of this college football playoff. There are years where it's like Georgia and Alabama are in, Ohio State's in, Oklahoma's in. Or Clemson's in, Ohio State's in, USC. Whatever the years are, there are years where it's like, oh, there are 4 teams and there's a gap, then there's everybody else. I don't think North Carolina is good enough to be in, that penthouse. But if there's only, 2 teams in the penthouse, they can be 3 or 4. You know what I mean? Wherever that break is, I don't see the super obvious, no doubt, always going to be there, have to be there, top level teams like we've seen in the past. Right? I mean, there was a stretch there where, it felt like the years in the NBA where the Cavs and Warriors were playing each other every single year. And it was like the regular season was just to have fun before they eventually had a classic 6 or 7 game series between the Cavs and the Warriors. For a while there, it did feel like it was going to be Oklahoma, Ohio State, 2 teams from the SEC, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama, LSU. That's what it was. You throw Clemson in there also. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like that this year.
Seems like it's pretty wide open for a lot of teams this year.
Even a team like Georgia that hasn't lost a game in 3 years. I mean, they're getting scared pretty routinely now.
They just smack Kentucky around a little bit.
There's a lot of half times where you're like, ooh, that's closer than I thought it'd be.
But Alabama, even though they played pretty well against Texas A&M, they still have a loss to Texas, who just lost to Oklahoma. Okay, go out to the Pac-12. Yeah, you have USC, you have Washington, you have Oregon, but those teams are all going to be playing each other. Washington and Oregon play each other, so their losses are going to take place amongst those games. So someone might get 2 losses just by default, if they play in the Pac-12 championship game. So
Michigan
says that
still
UNC
has to play Penn State and Ohio State.
Yeah, and Ohio State still has to play those teams themselves as well. So if UNC gets through Miami,
this weekend is one of the big tests.
Yeah, despite Miami with their blunder, Like this past.
They
this past Saturday.
should be a top 20 to top 15 team.
They should be.
Because they were 17 and had the game won, chose not to win it, lost, and now they're 25. They probably would have jumped up to 15.
Yes, because the Mario Cristobal, their head coach, all he had to do was just take a knee and they would have walked off the field with a win.
They chose not to win a game.
And then they literally fumbled the ball on a run play, and then Georgia Tech ended up beating them on a deep pass.
We'll talk about it. We'll dive in. Be around
for sure
after the numbers game, which is at 5:30. I have thoughts.
But once you get past that, it's Duke and NC State. That's Clemson.
Like it's saying North Carolina is a college football playoff contender is not just saying like, oh, they're as good as Clemson was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's not just saying, oh, they're the new Alabama under Saban. Like it's not that. It's saying there are some things that are breaking their way.
Exactly. Things are lining up for you. Things are setting up for you to get to the ACC championship game undefeated. And if Florida State is also undefeated in that game, if that's who you're playing,
that's
or maybe it's Louisville, exactly, it's a playing game.
And you have a puncher's chance at least because you have Drake Maye.
Exactly.